Hey everyone, I finished watching the next Wild Force episode, Wishes on the Water. This is another really good one. I'm really liking Wild Force so far. It's weird because Wild Force has never really been a favorite season of mine or anything. It's not one that I've thought about a lot. It was always just this kind of, weird, like, in-between season. Like, it's after Time Force, which is my favorite season ever, and then it's before the Disney era begins. And I like Ninja Storm, but aside from Ninja Storm and RPM, I'm not really that big into the Disney era seasons. They're just kind of there for the most part. Um, so yeah, Wild Force never really had all that much resonance in my head. It's just the weird like end of the Saban era, beginning of the Disney era, and it's this weird kind of thing that exists on its own because the tone is so different from anything that came before or since. But anyway, moving on to the actual summary. So the Rangers are up on the Animarium, and Alyssa is reading a story to Danny and Max. I don't know, it's just kind of weird that, like, I get that, like, one of the things at the end is Alyssa becomes a teacher, so I guess you could see this as, like, she's practicing being able to read a story engagingly to people. Like, I don't know, I guess it makes sense for Danny. I kind of expect Max to fall asleep given the personality he's revealed so far. So anyway, so yeah, Max falls asleep, and there's this funny little bit with, let's see, Alyssa's offended that he fell asleep while she was reading the book, and he's like, "Oh no, no, I was awake. I know everything that you were talking about." And then she's like, "Oh yeah, well then what was it about?" And then Danny's behind her trying to motion to Max what to say, and uh, I love at the end when Danny is motioning, put the message in the bottle, throw the bottle in the lake, and grants a wish or something, and he's like, "Really?" It's a really great comedic bit. I freaking love it. It's awesome. So anyway, while that's going on, Max or Cole is looking at the picture of his family. They just say family now. I guess they don't bother keeping that part a secret. So anyway, Taylor shows him a picture that she has of her old Air Force squadron or some kind of plane group she was in. I don't know if it was specifically Air Force. I can't remember. It probably was. Whatever. It's not important to the rest of the episode. It's just a little seed to plant. So, oh, and let's see. When Max fell asleep during Alyssa's story, he had a nightmare vision of the Rangers and the Megazord losing in battle to something. And so he's all shaken up by this. And when he learns of the story was about like putting a note in a bottle and tossing it into a lake and the lake would grant your wish, he decides to try that out. And it feels like the implication was supposed to be he was wishing that what he had the nightmare about wouldn't happen, but it turns out to be something completely different at the end. So anyway, meanwhile, while that's going on at the org base, I don't really know what to call where the orgs live. Toxica smells something. Smells like a human. And then she goes down and she sees Master Org like sitting on his throne or something, and he's moving his horn around. And she's like, "What the?" And she gasps. He hears it. "Who's there?" And he goes out. "Who is there?" And she keeps herself hidden. And then he's like, "Oh, whatever." And then he goes back in. And then later on, she confronts Jindrax about what she saw. And the funny thing is, they're both sitting on a swing set at night. Wild Force has some really cool, like, unique locations in it that we don't see in any other Saban seasons. There's lots of really interesting choices they make and things that keep it interesting. And this is a neat little quirk to these characters that they hang out at a swing set. So anyway, there's a neat little bit where let's see, looking through my notes here. Okay, so Toxic tells Jindrax about I saw Master Org move his horn, and or no, at first she grabs Jindrax's horn and like pulls it around. And the funny thing with this is she wasn't doing this to make a point to Jindrax that like it's not natural for our horns to move around. It seems like the way it was played and presented was more like she was genuinely curious. Can they move? I know mine doesn't. Does his? So that was a funny little bit. Anyway, they just kind of brush this off, and do whatever on the swing set. Then, meanwhile, at the Animarium, Shayla alerts the Rangers about a new org. This org is made out of old boat parts, and when Max sees, oh, that was something. Earlier on, let's see, with the Rangers, let's see, yeah. Max goes for a walk, and he puts a note in a bottle, tosses the bottle into the lake, and so then when the org comes up out of that same lake, Max sees that on its shoulder is the bottle with the note in it that he threw in earlier, and he really wants to get that bottle back for some reason. It was a thing earlier, too, when he throws the bottle in the lake, Danny sees it, and he doesn't want Danny to see it. And so anyway, they fight the org, and then Max takes on the org himself, trying to get the bottle back. The monster ends up, or maybe it's Max, I don't remember. One of them pulls the other into the water, and there's a big fight underwater, and that's always really cool to see in Power Rangers when they attempt an underwater fight, or a fight that's like anywhere but on solid land. Anyway, Max loses, he ends up washing up ashore far away, it's implied. The Rangers take him up to the Animarium, and he has another nightmare, and this time he hears voices in the nightmare. Let's see, the Megazord falls over, he can hear someone say, "We were defeated with something or other." And then he wakes up, he can't remember exactly what the voice was saying, but then he goes back to join the Rangers fighting the Orgs. Let's see. Jindrax and Toxica show up with an army of putrids, the Rangers are fighting with the putrids, and Max jumps up on this crane thing, knocks the org down. Oh yeah, and first he cuts one of its horns off, which if you'll notice in the thumbnail, I drew the org with 2 horns because I forgot that point, and my reference picture for the org had him with 2 horns. Whoops. Whatever, anyway. Back to the thing. So he's fighting with the org one-on-one, and, oh yeah, the org falls down, and it smashes the bottle open, and, Max is all mad at the monster about this, which I don't think the monster intentionally, like, had your bottle as part of his body, dude. Whatever, anyway, let's see, the Rangers defeat the org, and then Toxica revives it as a giant, the Rangers get the Megazord, and then, so they're fighting the org and the Megazord, and then Max realizes the fight is going just the way it did in his nightmare, but then he suddenly remembers the voices in his nightmare. What they said was the Spear of Pardolis, and Shayla tells the Rangers that the Spear of Pardolis is another Wild Zord, and it must have been trying to call out to Max. So Max successfully summons the Spear of Pardolis, which is the Giraffe Wild Zord. It turns into a spear, connects to the Megazord. With its help, they defeat the org for good. And then later, Max goes back, he picks up the note from earlier, he unravels it, and we see what it says is, "I wish the other Rangers would treat me like an adult." Danny comes over, and Max doesn't care if he sees the note anymore. They put it in a new bottle, they chuck the bottle in the lake, and there's the end of the episode. It's a pretty good one. I like it. It's got a weird tone to it. One of the weird things with Wild Force has been the tone of it. The whole series feels like, or so far, it's very fairy tale-like. Not like the anime, or maybe it is like the anime. I haven't seen Fairy Tail the anime. I did read the manga back in high school, though. I don't remember much of it. Anyway, so yeah, it's very fairy tale-like. The way things unfold, the way characters think about things, and the note at the end, "I wish the other Ranger would treat me as an adult," feels kind of ironic to me because everything surrounding Wild Force has a very childlike view of everything. Like the scene I was talking about earlier with Jindrax and Toxica on the swing set. For one thing, they're both adults. I assume so. They're like hundreds of years old, it's implied, so I don't know, it's just kind of weird that they'd be hanging out on swing sets. It's the kind of thing that, as an adult, oh, that's quirky and odd, but as a kid, it didn't even occur to me. I remember seeing this episode, too, and that's the kind of thing I never really thought twice about, is, like, if the monsters were on swing sets. It was just a new location to me, and the whole thing with Toxica yanking Jindrax's horn around, genuinely curious to see if it would move, feels like a very childlike thing to do instead of, like, if they were to do this kind of thing now, that would never happen. She'd, like, just keep telling Jindrax, "I saw Master Org doing something weird," and he'd be like, "Oh, maybe you're imagining it, or maybe there is something weird, let's keep an eye on him," and we wouldn't get the action of her trying to move Jindrax's horn because she is genuinely curious to see if it would move. Because now Power Rangers doesn't really have that kind of childlike view of the world. It has like a very watered down adult view of the world. I don't know how to say what I'm thinking, but anyway, um, the character focus episodes so far in Wild Force have been really good. Oh, and interestingly, Max has had 2 focus episodes. He was heavily focused in that one previous episode. What was the name of that one? Never Give Up. How could I forget that? So anyway, Never Give Up had a shared focus for both Danny and Max. This one is definitely more Max, but there's also a little bit for Alyssa in there. Not so much the other Rangers. Shayla's actually gotten quite a bit of backstory so far, which is interesting for the mentor of the season. Usually we don't get too much backstory about the mentor figures of the season. So, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this one, kind of like the last episode. It's a very straightforward episode. It's a standard episode of Power Rangers. I'd really like if this had become the norm for Power Rangers. Like, if Disney had never moved filming to New Zealand, if they had never, like, canceled the show initially and had to have it be moved to New Zealand, I think if it had stayed in Los Angeles with Jonathan Zacher in charge, this would have been a cool direction for the show to take. I think this would have been really neat for it to have this sticking far closer to the Sentai style than any other season had done so far. And I remember watching Gaoranger for the first time, like, after I had seen all of Wild Force. Like, after the DVDs came out, I went back and I watched a bunch of the Sentai versions. I think Gaoranger I watched all the way through. I don't quite remember. I remember the bad guys being a lot more boring in Gaoranger than they are in Power Rangers. Sometimes there's like little things that Power Rangers does slightly better than Sentai, and Sentai does things better than Power Rangers. Anyway, it was really interesting seeing Gaoranger and Wild Force side by side because so much of Gaoranger shone through Wild Force. Even when the plots were altered, you could still see, like, oh, the way the camera moves, this one scene, the way it's set up, the way the characters look, the way they're dressed, the dialogue, the names of things, everything is very similar to how it was done in Gaoranger. And it's interesting to consider if Power Rangers had stayed in California, how would a Ninja Storm turned out? Would it have been like a lot like Hurricaneger? Like just basically it's Hurricaneger but a little bit different, kind of like how Wild Force is Gaoranger but a little bit different. Some characters' personalities are tweaked around, and the bad guys, maybe there's a new bad guy in there. And anyway, yeah, there's Wishes on the Water. This was a fun episode. I like the tone of it. The characters are really fun in Wild Force. Really looking forward to the rest now. The next episode I remember really well, Bare Necessities. Was that a Disney joke? Huh. Maybe not. Who knows? Anyway, I do remember that one really well. I do like that one. I remember my grandmother watching that one with me, and she thought that, or, well, I'll talk about it when I get to the next episode. So, yeah, that's it for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. See ya.